This is a special edition of Smacking Off the Podcast.
Smacking Off the Podcast.
I think it was Terry Bowden who told Tim Brando once on the Tim Brando show when he was still working for ABC and he's sitting there doing pregame with John Saunders. He says he looks over on the field and they was in break and he tells John, he goes, this isn't even going to be a ball game. This game is going to be over quickly. And I think, what was it on Miami's first possession in the 2002 Rose Bowl? Wasn't it Ken Dorsey to Andre Johnson for a long score? It was a big splash play. I remember that. Yeah, they got a gift facing Nebraska that year.
Nebraska had looked really good for a lot of the year that year, and they really just, the wheels came off toward the end of the season.
Colorado, they surprised them. I think if Nebraska plays a better game against Colorado, they're probably, their psyche's not shot, and that's probably a pretty good game.
I don't even think they should have played Oregon that year. That would have been the game.
It wouldn't have been much different. I mean, it's like a team with the same record and playing in a weaker conference with, you know, he didn't get blown out by Oregon. I mean, so that's cool. But
I mean, Oregon probably plays them a lot closer than Nebraska does. What Nebraska scored in that game, 7 points. I mean, yeah, that Oregon team throttled that Colorado team that beat the hell out of Nebraska.
Yeah, but Colorado did what they were happy, dude. They beat Nebraska. They beat Texas. They were.
Anytime you go to a major bowl game, you want to win it. Don't. They weren't there for.
I'm not saying that they didn't want to win it, but they didn't. Like, they were happy with where their season was. That was house money for them.
They might have been happy, but I mean, Oregon came in pissed off because Oregon belonged in that championship game and they housed them. Ontario Smith had a day. I mean, there's a running back name from the past.
I didn't get hurt because it probably would have been an undefeated Oklahoma team in that game against Miami, but that's a different story for today.
Yeah, that 2001 Miami
we're less
team.
than 3 minutes in, and then Tim brought up Oklahoma. That's a new record.
Nebraska.
Let's go.
Nebraska beat Oklahoma if Jason White got hurt when Oklahoma had that game. It's just we're talking about 2001 season. I mean, there's not a lot of good teams that year. Oklahoma was one of them. Nebraska was one of them. Oregon was one of them. There was really no other.
Nebraska didn't even win their division. Colorado won that division.
I know. I'm aware.
I mean,
Yeah,
Well-
this was the Alabama before Alabama was the thing again.
Yep.
Nebraska was, so.
Alabama was still in the doldrums during this time period, if memory serves.
God, what a great time that was. Can we go back to that?
No, it's not.
Ohio State was still in the doldrums as well.
They were.
Yeah, they were, little did they know, they were on the start of their upswing again.
So you just hired Tressel, if memory serves.
Yep.
So real quick, let's get a head count. Who believes that the 2001 Miami team is at least arguably the best team of all time?
Nope.
I do.
I do.
Absolutely.
I mean, if teams only if talent was the only thing that mattered, certainly. But since that's not the only factor, no way.
All right, I did a good job then. We're 2-2 here, right?
I don't even think it's the best Miami team they ever had.
I mean, it's arguably one of the best. I mean, it's in the top.
Yeah, it may be blasphemous. I mean, I might put and Sean, you've heard me talk about this before. I really think the 2000 team, even though they lost to Washington early that season, I really like that 2000 team better than what?
Week 2, they flew 3,500 miles to Washington and lost by 5 points.
That team, I really like better, both talent-wise and where that team was going towards that season. I don't think the 01 team had a season where they played anyone even remotely as tough as that 2000 team did between Florida State, Virginia Tech, and then even in the Sugar Bowl, Florida. That 2000 team, I think, was far better than 2001 in my mind. And I know this is I'm going to get Trigger Bailey real quick here. I really believe Miami should have been playing Oklahoma. And I know Devine and
I agree.
Bailey have gone back and forth on this. I think Miami just destroys Oklahoma in that game. So
There's no chance that would happen at all. None. Like, not even close to a possibility.
I think they win the game because it's in the Orange Bowl, but it's a close game for sure.
Washington should have been the team that was in there if we're going to play that stupid game because they also beat another top 5 team that year. If we're going to be that way,
Miami beat the number 1 team, so that trumps the number 5 team.
Miami had a much better schedule overall. I mean, they beat number 1, they beat number 2,
beat number 7.
Yeah, beat number 7. So, well, we can't count that because that was the bowl game. But like getting into BCS games wise to beat one of number 2 team in the country, that's pretty good.
The computer screwed Miami for Florida State. There's no denying that.
The BCS
Miami, Oklahoma. The big game Bob doesn't get his chip. The Miami teams of the early 2000s were amazing at exporting pros. A lot of people like to lump in the guys that were on the 2000 team, like Santana Moss and Reggie Wayne as well.
Wasn't Jeremy Shockey on that team as well?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Dan Morgan, who won the Butkus Award, was on the 2000 team. That team was good, and a lot of people like to bring up guys like Sean Taylor, who was a freshman who didn't see much action, and
Ed Reed was on that team, I think.
Don't remind me of Ed Reed. I still remember how he completely destroyed Omar Easy on the early series of the Penn State Miami game in 2001.
I love that, man. He separated shoulder. I'm hurt. Fuck it. Let's go.
Yep.
Ed Reed is a bad man. He's a bad dude.
Yeah, I mean, those two teams you put them up there with LSU from that draft, the Ohio State 14 team with their draft, the 04-05 SC team, probably some of those 70s Sooner teams that had a lot of players.
The Pitt teams in the early 80s. I mean, I hate Pitt, but look at the guys they sent to the NFL.
Early 80s Pitt had a
Ohio State's 02 team eventually, a couple years later, had a bunch of draft picks from that team in 04.
This team, one of the things that I think always, and this is a great example, I had to do this to Alex, but the Cooper era for Ohio State, they had tremendous talent. I mean, comparable.
94 Buckeyes.
They were sending dudes left and right, and they did not win a single title in that era.
Shocker.
A reminder that only talent is not the thing that's going to win.
Yeah.
They stole
talent is not the only thing that matters. They
don't hire John Cooper.
I mean, in 2001, that was one of the weakest fields of teams we've had in the turn of the century. I mean, when you look at what Miami did from from a feat standpoint, right? You look at what Miami's feats were this year, and you compare it to say 19 LSU feats, right? Or you compare it to 2020 Ohio State feats. Go in that 2004 USC feats. Those other teams had greater accomplishments within that season in terms of what they were able to do product on the field against opponents that were of quality.
I think the problem with that's looking at it through a vacuum because you can't. I mean, you can only play the teams you can play in a given year.
It's not their fault, but we know they had a shoddy coaching staff.
Yeah, that's what I was fixing to bring up. We can't leave out the fact that Larry Coker was the head coach of this team.
He's horrible.
I would say the only two drawbacks for this Canes team, if we're gonna throw kind of, if we're gonna give them props, we got to give them some negatives. Coaching staff obviously was definitely weak, starting at the head coaching spot. We saw that after Coker left. Alex Bryan can speak to that. I think Coker was with the Bobcats for a hot minute.
Frank Solich was at Ohio U forever.
And him too. He was another,
one of Nebraska's biggest mistakes, firing that man.
And then the other reason this team doesn't get a lot of props is, to be honest, what's the glamour position in sports? It's quarterback, and this team did not have a great quarterback. I mean, no disrespect to Ken Dorsey, nice guy. I think he's an offensive coordinator somewhere now, but he was the definition of a game manager. He was Kyle Lorton before Kyle Lorton with a lot of better surrounding pieces.
Correct. That was the other thing I was gonna bring up for them is, the two most important things in college football. Well, there's three really important things. Obviously, the talent, the overall talent, the coaching, and the quarterback. And two-thirds of it compared to other great teams. I'm not just saying any old team, but other great teams, they just don't have it in comparison. I mean, look at USC. They had Pete Carroll, Matt Leinart. I mean, Matt Leinart's, I know his NFL career didn't work out, but as a college quarterback, light years ahead of what Ken Dorsey ever could have dreamed of becoming.
Yeah, absolutely. Liner was at least a first-round pick. I can't remember what round Dorsey went in. I think it was a fourth.
I don't even think he got drafted, to be honest.
He did. I want to say it was like day 3 or something, way late.
He did.
The other thing I poke at 2001 Miami with is they didn't have that ultimate pass rusher. They didn't have like what Will Anderson was, or like a Bosa from Ohio State. That's a team like, you weren't like, if you sit there and say, so who was like their classic edge rusher? When you see the U Canes, like the original U run, you think of guys like Jerome Brown.
By the way, Ken Dorsey, round 7 pick, 241.
I knew it was late. I knew it got, but way late.
He was shooting way late.
Yeah, very true, Sean. It's just I can't, like, if we're going to poke holes at that team, that's a hole there. Like, who on that team was getting to the quarterback? I mean, that just wasn't it. I mean, you had amazing ball hawk defenders. I think Ed Reed had like 10 or 11 picks that year. Philip Buchanan is another name that comes up to my mind.
Yeah,
I don't think of, I'm not thinking of any like amazing, DNs or D tackles on that team. I know Vince Wolford was I believe a true freshman on that team.
I believe that's.
You might have to look that one up, guys.
He was. No, I'm looking it up right now. He was a true freshman. Your best D end on that team was Drew McDougal.
VidGo, streaming made easy. In the fast lane of streaming, VidGo offers the best live TV experience, period. Quick sign up, great features, and the widest selection of live sports, news and shows. All with no contracts and no hidden fees. It's never been easier to gain unparalleled access to virtually everything, wherever you are, for an unbelievably low price. Pay just $20 for the first month on any qualifying VidGo plan. Follow the Smacking Off VidGo affiliate link in the description for the best prices available.
The 0-2 Buckeyes get a lot of flack for playing a lesser talented Miami team than the 0-1 team because the 0-1 team's so highly touted. We played a lot of key big guys too, big names. Just want to throw that out there.
The 2002 Miami team didn't look incredibly different than the 2001 team.
No, it didn't.
It was still a tough task.
The craziest thing about this Miami team is all of it could have come crashing down one day against Virginia Tech. They were on the ropes, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time, but I'm pretty sure Virginia Tech was in field goal range, down 2, and they turned the ball over.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Mike was still there, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, and Virginia was the number 14th ranked team in the country when they played in Blacksburg on the road. So I know Virginia Tech now is not what they were, but you got to remember those.
So it was an okay team. It wasn't an amazing team. It's a top 25 team.
Yeah,
sure. It's not.
I totally forgot that the 0-1 Miami team had guys like Vernon Hargraves Jr., Randy Shannon, and Mark Stoops.
Yeah.
That guy was on staff? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean,
names.
Also, the quarterback was Grant Knoll for Virginia Tech in that game, not Michael Vick.
No Mike Vick? Okay. That's
in 2001, it has to be, because the nine. Yeah,
that's right. He had redshirted. They played 99. But for example, you beat a decent Washington team 65-7. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, some of these score against ranked team. I mean, you beat number 15 ranked Syracuse 59-0. I mean,
that Syracuse team had Dwight Freeney on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
no disrespect, but we all know that the Big East, the reason why it's no longer really it doesn't host football is because, unfortunately for them, it was a very weak league. I mean,
it should have never been a football conference. And you saw eventually the schism when some of the bigger schools went to the ACC and then some of the lesser football schools went to the American. But it was always a basketball conference. So you were trying to fit a round peg into a square hole there by adding, what was it, West Virginia, Miami, Boston College.
Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech for football. And
I mean, after this point, later on in this segment time, obviously Virginia Tech was good. That was the era. That was the best portion of Frank Beamer's tenure. But sometimes you end up having a team like 2001 Miami, who is not a bad team. And so I'm not trying to take away, but this isn't a great team. This is a team that probably doesn't win 10 games in many leagues. That particular team.
I don't agree with that. I think there's so much talent there as a whole that this team would compete in any era.
No doubt.
No. Some of the ranked opponents that they beat, like Syracuse, are somewhat juiced up because they're in more or less a group of 5 league, which is it was a group of 5 league with Miami and Virginia Tech, the Big East. I mean, it really was a weak.
It was probably the weakest of the Power 5, or then it was Power 6, but it was definitely one of the Power 6. But
Temple, Boston College. I mean, there's some Rutgers. I mean, some of these guys are Power 5 still, but they're not
they've latched on to Power 5 leagues.
I mean,
they're not Power 5 teams.
Miami played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 12 games. You played 10 Power 5 opponents. The non-Power 5s are Troy State and Temple.
So
now, are they great Power 5 opponents? Not all of them. A lot of them are middle or bottom tier. For example, Rutgers is habitually at the bottom of the Big Ten, but it's still a Power 5 program.
And like I said, what's tough for Miami, and it's not their fault, is that 0-1 schedule. I mean, overall, it's kind of they did play an out-of-conference game against Penn State and Washington. It would help to make up for it, and Florida State. So their out-of-conference was actually pretty darn good. But
to your point, I think the Miami schedule of the 80s, when they were still independent, they had much harder schedules in the 80s, like 86, 87, 88, 89. Those schedules were much harder. In fact, 89, I can't disagree with Steve Unger as much as I like to. They did beat just about every power conference champion that year in 89,
to me, that 89 squad, even though they lost, I think they lost to Florida State.
I think that, you have to take into consideration the talent, and I think that using the NFL,
nice pussy,
using maybe their draft positions, et cetera, is definitely something that it should be at least evaluated and considered. I mean, obviously, we know that certain players will develop further in the NFL and become better, et cetera, but Miami had so many talented players that NFL teams thought were worthy of first-round picks. I believe a record number. It says they had the most players selected in a draft ever with 14. That's also, I think, a relevant factor for them.
Tied.
Okay. Anyway, long story short, I think that talent is not the only factor. If it was, I think that 2001 Miami would have as good an argument as any. I mean, they really would. If we just went solely off, hey, did they have really good players compared to other teams that had really good players? Absolutely, they had that going for them. Kyle brings up a great point, and he used the example of Pitt, who's a team that didn't win a national championship, that also had several quality players, that didn't win a title, and they're not considered one of the best. But maybe had they won the national title, beaten Florida State that year, maybe they would be in this discussion too. But it just goes to show that just having the talent alone is not the entire factor. That year, Miami was able to do so because their talent and the field was questionable around them. But could they have beaten 2004 USC, who had similar talent and significantly better coaching and quarterback play, right? So that's really the question.
I guess that's my question really is, especially for the two guys that think that this arguably is the best team of all time, is what does that mean to you? Does it mean
my problem is, Doug, I'm going to be on the 2004 USC one, so I think those are 1 and 1A. I mean, in my perspective. Now, you have a lot of people that argue habitually for 95 Nebraska. My problem with that is, Tommy Frazier option football. I'm sorry,
be a pain in the ass.
To me, they would not survive in modern football. You got to be able to pass the ball somewhat. I mean, And 95 Nebraska, as great as they were, watched all those games. I mean, I love the demolition of Florida in the Fiesta Bowl. That was great. Watching Steve Spurrier just be beside himself.
Just basically give up by the third quarter.
Yeah, but I don't think in the modern era that team hangs with teams that can pass the ball.
That team was only 6 years previous to it, and that team had tons of NFL players too.
They had a ton of NFL players, but they weren't really stars in the NFL. This Miami team had stars. I mean, talking bona fide Pro Bowlers and now some that will be Hall of Fame.
They weren't just stars in the NFL; they were stars in college too, like big stars.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tom Frazier was about as good as you can get as an option quarterback. I know a lot about option football.
We're talking
Tommy Frazier was a man.
Wasn't kind of an option quarterback. The Heisman winner that year, Eric Crouch, and that guy barely sniffed a cup of coffee in a workout to be a receiver for the Rams. I mean, and then they just laughed and said, "Go home."
I mean, you're right, but there's a lot of laughter when it comes to 01 Nebraska. Okay, like there's a lot of jokes that they're like the France of college football that year.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Crouch is arguably one of the worst Heisman winners of all time.
Right there with Jason White.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, how is he that? Like, that guy was a winner.
He was 30 years old, playing with kids.
He says his prayers every night, and then he sends a Christmas card every year to Larry Fitzgerald, and he says, "I really apologize for."
Come on,
Jason White literally was a guy who injuries kept him from being a really good NFL quarterback. He had all the talent to do so. He was just a paper mache man. The poor guy. Like that's like the shittiest part for him. Like he had first round talent and then tore his ACL like 6 times. Like, I don't know, man. It's hard to go against a guy who was as good as say he was the worst. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, the guy was comparing him to Eric Crouch is just not fair. Jason White was a really
I think Eric Crouch is worse than Jason White. I mean,
it's not too far off though.
Gino Torretta is up there.
Jesus.
That was, very bad.
Rashawn Salam will always be there in my book.
Jason White was one of the best quarterbacks, though, during the time that he played. It wasn't like he was just some sort of, like, scrub who lucked into it. He's not Johnny Manziel. Like, he's not Johnny Manziel or Eric Crouch. Like, he just got lucky and got there. Like, it's not that crazy.
Johnny Manziel won the Heisman for beating Alabama. I mean, that's why there's a lot of people that have Heisman votes that need to have them taken away.
Yeah.
But he beat Alabama. Yeah, but what did he do the rest of the year?
We should totally do a segment about Heismans and stuff because that would be very interesting.
Let's do it.
If we do, be easy on my boy Troy, okay? He had a great season. Just one game sucked.
He was a hell of a Canadian Football League quarterback, let me tell you.
Yeah. Hey, listen, and an Omaha Nighthawk quarterback, He went all around, okay?
Paul Hornung on a 3-win team won a Heisman Trophy over Tommy McDonald.
It was a 5-win team, by the way, and he not only quarterbacked, he played, kicked, and played defense.
Just quarterback, bro. He kicked the ball.
Jim Brown might be the greatest football player ever, but we're going to give the award to Paul Hornung.
I would say it was either Hornung or Jim Brown. By the way, it's like you didn't give it to Jim Brown, you gave it to Paul Hornung, but Paul Hornung's still in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So
is Tommy McDonald and Jim Brown. Like, I guess that's a pretty loaded room that year, right?
I would say,
I don't know if they went to. I don't know if they actually went to New York back then, but that would have been a hell of a spectacle to get in black and white, right?
They gave Charles Woodson the Heisman, and you had Peyton Manning sitting there and Randy Moss sitting next to him. So
he deserved it. He unfortunately deserved it.
I think Manning was better, but
he got it because he played on offense too. That helped.
Sort of offense. He played a few.
Fine. Humans are noisy. They thrive on chaos. They like to make things. It gives them meaning. They do it over and over and over again until they shut down. Humans are fueled by inspiration. Inspiration and something called tacos. Change makes them nervous, but embracing it changes everything. Yeah, imagine that.
Sean, you brought up scheme, right? You brought up scheme, and scheme has evolved since the time Miami played football. From the time that Nebraska in '95 played football to the time Miami was playing that open Miami, the scheme was very different. The scheme is significantly better today and even 5 years ago than it was in 2001. I mean, the scheme in 2008 and 2010, 8 to 10, like when things started to change compared to 01, I mean, those offenses would have shredded the schematics of the 01 Miami defense, not the talent and the players, but the way that those teams played. So it is also hard to compare that way, too.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah, so where does Miami stack up against the teams that came afterward?
Barely for me, top 10. I really believe there's 5 or 6 teams.
Oh, you are going to piss some people off with that.
Oh, I know I am, and that's fine. But it's just the evolution. Athletes are better. Schematics are better. There's better coaching. You know, I'm sorry.
Stuff that they did back then would get flagged a lot now.
Well, that too. That's a good point.
The players that they have could be adjusted to play in this era. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
they could.
They could, yeah.
So certainly. But
yeah, I mean, this is well before the targeting where you touch a guy and immediately you're ejected from a game.
I mean,
so.
and I think it's hard because I noted that Miami in 01, the matchups they had, they didn't play any quarterbacks that were like worth a sniff, except for apparently it wasn't actually a quarterback. But anyway, the only game that a similar regime was in place that with a decent quarterback, Chris Winkie, remember, threw for 500 yards on them just the year before. So obviously, the way that they were coached on the second, if you have Ed Reed and Antrell Roll and
Stinky Winkie,
like you would think that Chris Winkie would throw for 500 yards on you.
Well, speaking of their coaching though, and they said this in the U documentaries on ESPN, the biggest reason why Miami works so well, especially under Larry Coker, was because the players ran the team, not Larry Coker. And once they got beat for the first time during that long streak, I won't say what game it is because we all know, but once they got beat and then all of a sudden the players weren't able to coach the team anymore, you haven't seen Miami since. I wonder why.
Yeah.
So,
Miami's a tough place.
But, it's been a number of things. Joining the ACC has been one.
Right. That didn't help.
The Nevin Shapiro situation and Don Shalala being president, they significantly
the bowling alley.
De-emphasize. Yeah,
Miami.
They de-emphasize
just right now that
winning in football to not having any off-field situations. A kind of subsidiary to that, de-emphasizing winning football is you're not spending money on infrastructure. And when you don't spend money on infrastructure, you see all this talent that in the first U documentary, which you referenced, Alex, remember that state of Miami, which is basically Miami to Tampa, you wall it off, all that talent south of there. That's leaving. That's going to the SEC. It's going to Alabama. It's going to Florida. Hell, some of it's even going to Clemson. If you're not keeping your ingrown talent nearby, you lose games to Florida Atlantic. Hell, you barely they barely crossed the 50-yard line in a bowl loss to Louisiana Tech. I mean,
that has shown in the past to be Miami's only ticket to the elite status is to keep all that talent.
You have to keep the South Florida talent there. Otherwise,
and that
not just keeping the talent there, it's having the crazy amount of talent, and there's always a good amount of talent there, but the talent that was there in that time period is way different than the talent that there is now. And that's another school that we know and love. LSU will have the same issue if the tap starts getting a little drier and a couple teams start coming and taking a few guys. They're going to have an issue.
They're going to have a problem because their head coach will not stop grinding on players in player promos. Okay,
he came there for his family.
Yeah. Sean Devine is one of the happiest men in the world seeing him in another school. Okay,
so happy.
Here's the other thing with 2001 Miami that's different than today is, look at the prep schools now. Look at IMG Academy. IMG Academy wasn't really the big thing back in that 20, 30 years ago when this was all going on. Like, that's just producing like monsters, and that's fulfilling things in the SEC. The other thing I like, and I keep beating the dead horse here, and I'll beat it again. Look at some of these Nick Saban Alabama teams, Dabo Swinney Clemson, Urban Meyer's Florida Gators, like the 08 squad, or the Buckeyes that he had, Florida State 2013. You start looking at some of these teams, man, they were loaded with talent. LSU 2019. I'm sorry, I think the only one of these modern teams that, when you look at 2019 LSU, it's uberly talented, but the bottom line with that thing is that might be the only even coaching matchup they have there. Because do we take Coach O or do we take the
That's a good question.
Well, you're talking coach. I would compare the 08 Gators. I mean, Ken Dorsey against Tim Tebow. They're both bad in my opinion. So.
Well, for some people, Tim Tebow.
Unless we're comparing jump passes, then obviously Tebow gets the edge in the jump pass.
But Tebow was an excellent college. He's an example of a great college player who obviously didn't pan out in the NFL because his talents don't translate.
In fact,
that doesn't take away from the fact that he was a great college.
He was a great college player. Doesn't mean
he's
that
arguably by resume, he's arguably the GOAT college player. I mean, that's just
which I hate saying because fuck Tim Tebow.
I mean, you got Aaron Hernandez, no jokes. Riley Cooper, no jokes. The Pouncey brother, no jokes.
I mean, the only thing the 08 Florida Gators had more than Pro Bowlers on that team was arrests. Let's be honest.
Correct.
I mean,
luckily
they had a child of God quarterback.
Go ahead.
The biggest thing for me is when it comes to Miami, and that every year, kind of like Texas, which Tim's all too familiar with, we have to hear that they're back. For me, the biggest way they're going to get back is exactly what they got sanctioned for like 10 or so years ago, when it comes to like the Nevin Shapiro thing, which Sean brought up. All that under the table payment stuff. Well, now you have NIL in the mix. And I'm very interested especially under Mario Cristobal, which was a good hire by them. If that doesn't pan out, I don't know how they're going to get it together.
They need someone that loves Miami because.
But let me add one piece to that, Alex. So one thing I think a lot of people forget, because you watch the U documentaries, and you see the kind of the pomp and circumstance that is Hurricane football from both their eras where they were great. Is what people forget, once the Nevin Shapiro subsided, and they kind of de-emphasized football in so much as we don't want any off-field shenanigans, is that also, the University of Miami, even though it's, in the University of Miami, they call themselves University of Miami, it's a private school in Coral Gables, which is actually a very challenging academic school to get into. And they kind of want to uphold. They're trying to be as the South Florida version of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
But the problem with that is, and I hate to say this, but where their recruiting base is, a lot of those players at Northwest, at Dade, Aquinas can get. They have some players that are academically eligible, but getting that same Notre Dame recruits. The problem for they can't really recruit nationally. They have to recruit in Florida. And a lot of those players right now, at least unless they're going to change things for Cristobal, they don't academically qualify at the University of Miami. They simply don't, unless they're going to start, no offense to Doug in the SEC, but unless they're going to start changing those requirements for the football players per se. USC does that too. Miami is similar. But if they want to re-emphasize football, you got to start being able to get those kids in that are from Carroll City, from Overton, from Coconut Grove, etc. That on a normal basis probably don't get into the University of Miami.
Well, sure, but Miami does lower their academic standards for athletes, unlike Notre Dame. That's why Notre Dame is more in that position.
They do,
and yet somehow Notre Dame is more successful. That's great.
They do, but they've tightened that window from, say, the NCAA minimum ACT or SAT to a little bit better which is why you're seeing them be 7-5, 8-4, losing a lot, attacking a bowl game. Except
They
Sean Devine mentioned. Sean Devine mentioned. There's the reason Notre Dame can be Notre Dame and do the things is when you go to Notre Dame's campus and you look at Notre Dame's facilities and you go throughout there, it's gorgeous and top rate. Miami has a beautiful campus, but when you start looking at their facilities, it's an absolute joke.
Yeah.
Like I've heard horror stories about their basketball program, and the fact that Al Larinaga has done what he's done for that basketball program. I'm not trying to make this turn into Dr. Balls too, but what I'm trying to get at is if Miami wants to start competing with the powerhouses, like just go on YouTube and type in a major university like Ohio State or Alabama or someone and type in facility tour and just look at the facilities. Even WVU's facilities are unreal.
That's half the battle anymore.
That's such a great point, because I'll tell you, even to this day, that's a great point Kyle makes. Even to this day, as what you would call a big-time Power 5 program, the U still does not have a 100-yard long indoor facility. They don't.
That's wild.
You are now watching or listening to Smacking Off the Podcast. If you love it, tell your friends about it. If you hate it, share it with your enemies.
Every other major, not only do we have 100, you have a huge facility that houses multiple 100-yard fields indoors at places like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Alabama. Miami's working on a 50-yard indoor facility.
It sounds like Cristobal has his work cut out for him. He needs to be fundraising and figuring out how to get that shit done.
He definitely does.
And $10 million donation
he
from
needs
The Rock
to take advantage of the NIL.
Yeah,
he needs to take advantage of the NIL.
Just to get their weight room back to even kind of like a low par. They needed the $10 million donation from The Rock to get free weights and shit for their weight room, because their weight room literally was like the 1970s.
That's a big point too, because when you have enough alumni who are very rich alumni, even former players that help the university, that is huge, and that's why Ohio State keeps running, because they're former players and they have the large alumni base. That's why Notre Dame.
But see, that's the difference. That's the problem with being in the ACC and the ACC having a shitty TV deal versus the Big Ten and the SEC. Their television war chest nets them, each school in either of those conferences is getting at least $35 million plus a year. The ACC doesn't have that, and Miami needs all that money they possibly can get. Because they don't have the huge. I mean, Ohio State's alumni network is stupid. Penn State's is stupid. Michigan's is even stupid.
Hey, watch your mouth. We don't say that word. I'm sorry.
I know. But Miami, again, private school in Coral Gables, that alumni base is not as big as you think.
It's not. Because it's restrictive, like you mentioned. The other thing that USC has a similar profile to Miami, not as bad of a situation, but they have to fix their stuff now. Obviously, they just reached into some sort of wallet that I didn't know that existed for them, because they supposedly were having financial problems, and they found a way to pull Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, right?
Snoop Dogg probably donated some money.
Well, here's the thing about
Here's
one little difference. Here's the one little difference that Miami. So they both have great academic alumni that can donate money. What Miami doesn't have that USC has the top film school in the country. So not only that, they got some Hollywood money from guys like Will Ferrell, John Spielberg there.
Yep, and when they get excited about football there, they start opening their wallets.
Exactly. So you got a little bit of Hollywood money that Miami doesn't have, unless Pitbull wants to give them some money.
And that was the biggest problem for USC during the Pete Carroll regime. They had a lot of celebrities showing up to practices all the time and handing out some cash here and there.
It's a different Miami, and USC's a different vibe. But I'm going to say this. Miami got extremely lucky. They hit a lottery that shouldn't have happened. First of all, Mario Cristobal was a long shot to become a good head coach. I mean, from being an offensive line coach, that doesn't usually work out, okay? That's a rare thing, okay?
It is.
He ends up getting
Phil Fulmer.
a high-profile job at Oregon because his players asked for him to be there after Willie Taggart left. He does a better job than Willie Taggart. He sets up a situation. He really has a better job at Oregon. They have better facilities. They have better recruiting opportunities.
Oh,
they have better everything, right?
Without question. He downgraded there.
Loves Miami.
But
and
you're
that
in
is why.
Eugene, Oregon, and you're not in Miami.
Well, he loves
That
Miami.
that's the big flop. Yeah.
But you have to love the Miami program, not just being in Miami. Loving being in Miami is only going to get you so far. You have to love that.
If I'm a Hurricane football player, if I'm a top high school recruit, you show me Eugene, Oregon, you show me Miami, Florida. I'm a young man. Miami's the easy decision there.
Don't act like it's some ass area. I mean, Eugene is a great area.
Eugene's a lovely little city. I was just there actually this week. I stopped in on my drive down to Cali, but it's not Miami. And if you're a young football player, the talent that is available is much different in South Florida versus in Eugene.
When LeBron made his decision to go to South Beach, that made a boom in Miami. And Miami's in sort of a renaissance right now, the city itself. You're getting a lot of New York money that's coming down there. It's being treated seriously. You got the amazing fertile recruiting ground. They got to start taking advantage of their geographic advantage, the city advantage, and the people that are there.
I do want to speak to your point real quick, Kyle, about the facilities. And here's another big point that I think did Miami such a huge disservice. They need to get an on-campus stadium back.
Yeah.
Going 20 miles up the road to Palm Beach Gardens to play where the Dolphins play is killing them. It's just like the days when Minnesota, and Minnesota's not great now, don't get me wrong, but when they were a dumpster fire, it was because their games were in the antiseptic Metrodome, which no high school player wants to go play in an empty-ass inflatable dome.
How about Pitt at Heinz Field?
Right. I mean, you need an on-campus stadium there to get the student body involved.
Correct. That's the big thing, right? And it's a money sap. They have to pay the Dolphins to use their facility. They already are strapped for cash, right? Like, if you look at the Florida schools, right? Okay, UCF is a sleeping giant. They're going to go to a Power 5 school. They're going to make a lot of money. And they're going to make more money than Miami. And they're going to have more alumni than Miami, okay?
They already do. I mean, they have a 65,000 student body.
Yeah, it's a huge university.
It's huge.
The city of Florida makes significantly more money than both Florida State and Miami.
They're in the SEC. They have the SEC TV
right.
deal.
They have the SEC money, but they're also they're the rich. They're one of the richest overall public universities in the world. That's separate from even their athletics. So
Fun fact about Florida too. I did not know this. They're an AAU member, so their academics are very up to par.
They are.
Florida is a very good school, and it's a public university. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of, they have a lot of things going for them right now that, Miami doesn't. I know they're not a very good program right now either. They have work to do. But
the thing keeping Miami from being AAU is they don't have research. They don't have a research facility.
Mm-hmm. The other
which is
for Miami, who comes like there's like I said, there's less talent in Dade County than there ever has been. In terms of just like they used to have just chunks of talent, just unbelievable volume of it. They don't have that. But guess what? Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame even went in and took it. People are going in there and they're saying, hey, now instead of 500 bodies, there's 300 bodies. And we're going to take our choice of 5 before you do. And then they still have to compete with Florida and Miami, Florida and Florida State for the scraps.
And Georgia and
Clemson. Hey, listen. I'm telling you what, though. If Miami had just started Tate Martell, they'd be one of the greatest teams in the country right now. Let me tell you something, okay?
They would have just held on.
They effed up on Tate.
Al Golden could have been their coach for life.
Tate Martell not even starting at UNLV is probably the most shocking.
We don't talk about that.
As you stated, Kyle, I completely. I really think they did themselves a disservice by letting Al Golden go. I think that program, had they given him 2 or 3 more years, would have been on a much greater uptick than shuffling through the 2 coaches that they hired after him.
Mark Richt, Manny Diaz.
Yeah, I mean
didn't Mark Richt leave kind of on his own though?
Mark Richt, if it wasn't for health.
Well, he had health issues.
He figured.
I think under him they would have eventually turned it around.
I mean, they won 10 games with him immediately.
Yeah. Didn't really get a full chance to get that back into a national contender.
I agree with that.
But how much was that?
I think Mark Rick got diagnosed with either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and God bless him. I hope he is
Right.
doing okay on his treatment.
He could have got them an ACC title at some point.
That's really, that's another great point too, is when you're recruiting there, and this is a challenge that Cristobal's going to have, is you've been in the ACC since 2004. You've been to, I think, maybe 2 ACC championship games. Just one? Is it just one? I know they went 17 and they lost to Clemson. I thought they went to one more, but if it's just one, that's
not
a
good.
problem, because now you're talking about 18-year-olds who've grown up their entire life. They've never seen the U win a conference title.
No, and these kids are not going to believe that they can compete for a national championship if they can't win an ACC championship.
Yeah, I mean, you're not even going to the big dance without winning your conference.
But hey, if the Wolverines can do it, so can they, right?
If you say so.
A broken clock is right once.
Louisiana.
Twice a day.
We talk about Louisiana Tech beating Miami, but people forget the bigger embarrassment that year. In-state FCS FIU, or no, they're not FCS. They're some.
Was it Florida Atlantic?
By the way,
No.
Louisiana Tech hasn't been like a totally bad team recently. They've been.
Florida International beat them
Florida,
as well.
the Panthers. Yeah,
I remember that. That big
that's
fight.
what
That
you
big
want,
fight
I think.
game.
That shouldn't happen. You're no. Miami
cannot happen.
losing to the other Miami school. Like, that can't happen at Miami.
Oh yeah.
And that's going to hurt your reputation and brand. And the reality is for Miami, and this is why I think people are so attracted to it, which is how crazy that run is. They have like 2 crazy runs, right? But Miami has a history. They're not a good program aside from these spurts.
You're right.
Yeah, they've had Spurs.
Well,
Yeah, we named them a blue blood,
1980
though.
It's 1980 to 2005. You're talking about a 25.
Who named them a blue blood?
I thought we named them the blue blood. Like,
Hell
you know,
no.
They would be no. We named them if we were expanding the Blue Bloods.
Yeah, we didn't put them in the top 8.
No.
Yeah,
If we
they're
were
not a top
expanding I remember this discussion very vividly. If we were expanding the Blue Blood list, we added 2 more,
Miami and Tennessee.
Miami and Tennessee, simply because Miami has 5 national titles and Tennessee has 6.
State instead of Miami, by the way.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Florida State has 3, and really 1 is very arguable. That gift that Bobby Bowden cried for in '93. He knows damn well Notre Dame beat the shit out of him. We rushed for like 400 yards on his team, and it is what it is.
Real quick before I go and stop recording, one thing I want to ask: what does it mean? Like, a lot of people are going to say that this is the best team of all time, and you're a fucking idiot if you don't believe that. People that listen to this cast,
I want to go that far.
well, you're going to get that from some people. Each of you, what does it mean to you? Like, who here still thinks that they're arguably the best team of all time? Sean and Alex?
I think they're in the discussion for sure.
Okay, Alex?
For sure.
But you wouldn't pick them. I'm going to put your foot to the fire a little. You wouldn't pick
Yeah.
them.
Are they the greatest?
Me personally, the best I've seen in my lifetime, and Doug's a little bit older than me. Kyle and I are about the same age. Alex is a few years younger, and Tim, I think you're about 10 years younger than me, right? You're, 28, 29? The best I've seen in my lifetime is the 2004 USC team. That is the best.
So
I've
that's
seen.
So,
Three.
but when we say best team of all time, do we mean that they would beat any of the other great teams of all time if they played, or are we just, you really can't match up teams from different years. You can do it speculatively.
Yeah, I don't do that. I mean, when I'm thinking of like the greatest teams of all time, obviously I look at the competition they played. I look at the scores of each game. Miami had only 2 close games that year. Otherwise, they pounded sand out of everybody. That's a type of season that I wish my Buckeyes would have, where they just pound the tar out of everybody. But
that don't necessarily mean that you think that they would beat 14 Ohio State.
And honestly, I'd love to see that matchup, because that's a lot of NFL talent right there. I don't know how that would go. But if I biasly judged it, with 0-2, how that game went, I mean, obviously we'd win.
I'm going to grab as many as I can, and I'm going to do some, for whatever it's worth, I'm going to simulate 2-0-1 Miami 10 times against, try to find the 10 best teams.
I kind of have a floating, top 5. I mean, I think 95 Nebraska deserves talk. I think 01 Miami does. 04 USC, 14 Ohio State. and then
Really?
20 Alabama. I don't really give 19 LSU a lot of props.
Defense? Is it the defense?
The defense was not very good, and really, let's be honest, all of us are adults and watched. They should have lost the Texas game. That was Texas just pissing down their own leg.
You're right.
I mean, you're inside the 5 twice, and you can't get any points. I mean, that's
you have a guy drop a ball that where no.
Well,
I could have caught that ball in the end zone and scored the 6.
If we're going down that route, and I might sound biased saying this, they shouldn't have even been the 1 seed in that playoff. They should have been the 2 seed. Ohio State should have been the 1 seed. They should have played Clemson in round 1, and then Ohio State, LSU, the matchup that everybody wanted anyway.
Absolutely. Ohio State got screwed.
And I give us a shot against LSU that year.
I do too. I mean, you got screwed by the seeding, and you got screwed in that game against Clemson. That targeting call was egregious. I remember watching that game in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and of course, everybody was very happy that Ohio State lost, and I was probably the only guy there rooting for the Buckeyes. But that call was dog shit bad. And by the way, it was by SEC officials, so I'll just say that.
Yeah, going into the game, I was already like, well, fuck. Here we go.
So for me, when I look at Miami, I agree with Sean. For me, the best team I've ever seen was 04 USC. And I think one of the things that 04 USC has, their schedule wasn't tremendously great, but they did have the feat of feats. I mean, if 04 Oklahoma would have won that game on the flip side, we'd be talking about them like that. And they beat the hell out of that Oklahoma team because that Oklahoma team was a team that was on that kind of level, and they beat a team that's way above the level of that 01 Nebraska team.
A team, by the way, that had a team, by the way, that had on that Oklahoma, and Tim knows this, but I'll say it, that had arguably a top 5 NFL running back of all time, right. Adrian Peterson on it. They made him look anemic. Yeah.
By the way,
it had Mark Clayton, Dan Cody, it had two Biletnikoff award. It had not a Biletnikoff, had a Thorpe winner on it. It had a Butkus Award winner on it. It had an elite offensive line.
And just for all the Auburn people out there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Shut up acting like you belonged in that game. You did not. You did not belong in that game.
Let me another Auburn fan tell me that they had 2 Adrian Petersons again. I might slap the hell out.
Let me get to that.
USC beat your ass the year before. You didn't belong in that game in 04.
2 years previously.
They went to the Plains and they beat Auburn 23-0 with a lesser team that started Herschel Dennis over Reggie Bush. By the way, Herschel Dennis didn't get a cup of coffee in the NFL. And Reggie Bush was
USC and Oklahoma started 1-2. They went coast to coast 1-2.
I mean,
you can't put Auburn above them just because they're an SEC team.
I have no doubt in my mind that on a neutral field, if USC plays Auburn,
both of those teams beat Auburn
by a lot.
By a lot.
Well, guys, we could probably go 2 hours on this easily.
Fuck my for recovering that onside kick because I wish UCLA would have somehow beaten USC. But,
yeah,
Sean does too. Sean does too.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna have my final thoughts here.
Yeah.
Before you cut off.
Okay.
My thing with Miami is that's a special group. They're always going to be amongst the greatest teams ever. When I think of the greatest team of all time, again, as I mentioned earlier, I keep it within college. I don't think of the pros. That might be flawed logic. I look at the similar things like Alex mentioned, who they all played, what was the scores and whatnot. And then I look at the journeys they've all gone on and what they did as a team and look at that. And I look at some of these teams of late, and it's not like I'm trying to have recent bias here, and I'm not trying to put down teams of the past either. But it's like you look at a 2004 USC, a 2008 Florida, you look at a 2018 Clemson, a 19 LSU, a 2020 Alabama. A couple of these Alabama teams have been really good. And you start looking at how complete these teams are and some of the domination they've gone through. You start to look at these things and you go, how am I watching? This is some of the best football I've seen from a single team, ever. And they're just stacked. I look at, 2001 Miami. If you want to start talking about NFL experts, I mentioned some Pitt teams that had a bunch of guys go to the Hall of Fame. You got a bunch of these teams that have runs with a lot of picks. I just feel like when I say this is the greatest team of all time, I don't only look at the individual year, but I feel I can plug and play them in any era, and they'll just dominate. And I don't feel 2001 Miami is that plug and play
because of what they've done in the NFL. That's why I do include the NFL. It's simply, could this guy play on any team at any time? And you look at that Miami roster, and a lot of those guys could. We're still waiting on, we have many years to see what happened with 18 Clemson, 19 LSU, and 20 Alabama.
18 Clemson won't match that.
I don't think Clemson's 18 team will. A lot of those guys are not. I mean, hell, I'm a Raider fan. I can tell you. Cleveland Farrell, that guy hasn't done diddly poo for the
Hunter Renfrow, on the other hand.
Hunter Renfrow did.
He was the only receiver we had left after,
hey, listen, he got me some fantasy points, so it is what it is.
Alabama 20. We drafted
hey, before we go, Doug, are you still recording?
I am.
It was a pass interference, 2002 national champs, baby.
Bullshit. So much bullshit.
All right. Well, the next segment we're going to do is on the 2002.
Please.
Okay. Sorry, 2003.
I would love to talk about that game. Get Steve on the podcast. I don't care if he's shy or not. Get him on here. I want to talk about this illegal knee hit he wants to talk about.
Before we talk about the game itself, Alex, we need to talk about how Maurice Clarett took a verbal final to be eligible for that game, which is incredible. I've never heard of that.
It is what it is. I've seen college athletes up close to some real suspect things, okay? And you know what?
A verbal final. That's a new one.
About some of the Alabama players is hilarious to me.
It is what it is, you know?
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do, just for recording purposes. This conversation may go on for 3 hours, but y'all don't get to hear all that shit, so I'm cutting this shit now. Goodbye if you're listening to the podcast.